Sports, 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 sports.
Hey there, sports fans. Welcome to Sportsball, part of the SPDM Crew podcast. We talk about sports-related topics, but we focus on you, the fan, and what you like, whether it's a sport, team, event, sports-related news, or athlete. This week, we are talking about Formula One as the season has officially ended. So I'm here with fellow SPDM Crew podcaster of Curbside Collections and good friend Adam Ritchie. And also, can't forget, he is the Formula One guru that just educates me on all this stuff, and he's a big fan too. So, Adam, thanks for coming on. You reached out to me this time and
I
saying,
did.
"Hey, is it time? Like, when are we going to do this?" So, I
Yeah,
appreciate
well,
that.
it's good for me to, well, firstly, thank you for the nice welcome. And it's always, I love being here and talking about, I have two passions in life, and film and Formula One are those. So yeah, I reached out pretty much maybe 2 days after the last race and was like, because if we wait too long, it's going to all escape from my memory and I'll be leading up to next year. So earlier the better for me. And why not? Good time to launch it and discuss the end of the season. It was a very, very good year for Formula One, considering the year we had previous and maybe a couple of even years before that. So can delve into the details of why I think that as we move along.
All right. So, the last time we talked, it was the summer. We were just
Mhm.
getting ready to go into the 6-ish week break that Formula One has in the middle of the season. So, since then, how many races do they usually have after it, like in the second half of the season?
Well, I'm just to save all the people writing in, it was about a 4 week break. Just so people
Mhm.
don't write in and abuse us and go, he's no expert if he's but that's it. So this year we
That
had 10 races.
that was
Oh,
a
test.
that was a test to see if you would get that right, and you passed with flying colors as usual.
Totally, totally believe you. Yeah, so when we last spoke, we it was the Belgian Grand Prix had just finished, and that was the 14th race. So we had 10 races since. So this was a very long year. Well, yeah, I think I've said this in the past. Back in the day, used to be 16, 17 races in a season, and it's slowly grown ever since. And now that Formula One is super popular, thank you to Netflix and Drive to Survive, it's just blowing up money wise. And if you do have money, not financial advice, but I'd be buying stock in Formula One in every chance I got, just because this sport is only growing. It's very undervalued at the moment. Anyway, 10 races since we last spoke, and the season is obviously wrapped up. We have our champions, drivers, and constructors, and a lot of news to discuss. So, where do you want to begin?
Why don't we start with why don't we start with our champion of the year?
Hmm.
So, kind of talk about how a champion is determined, who won, and
Hmm.
kind of give us your thoughts on how their performance was throughout the year, and do you think that they were a worthy champion?
Well, to answer your last point, absolutely. It's Max Verstappen, obviously. Well, if you don't know, Max Verstappen won the championship, his fourth world title in a row. I think he's only the third driver to win four titles in a row, and only maybe the fifth driver to have four titles or more, actually. So they do get shared around pretty well. But this last 20 years, it's basically just once a team gets dominant, a driver tends to win quite a few championships in a row. So it's not just luck. There is a lot of talent involved in getting to the right team at the right time, but also those drivers can lift that team. So going off on a tangent already. Long story short, he was very worthy. He won 6 of the first 7 races of the year, being that there were 24. Let me just count that. I've got my spreadsheet open. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He won 7 of the first 9 races. I apologize. And then only won 2 races since then. So there was actually a battle for the championship this year with Lando Norris from McLaren was closing the gap ever so slowly, and he had a chance to win the championship up until pretty much the Vegas race in Brazil. Max Verstappen showed why he deserved the championship this year because his performance in that race, he came from I think 18th on the grid, 19th on the grid, around that way. Sorry, I don't remember. I told you, yeah, my memory's not great with that number. But he come from a long way back and won the race. It was a rain affected race, so he just showed his class so much to win that race. And that, to me, was like, yeah, Max is the deserved champion this year for sure. I mean, considering he won 9 races and Lando won 4 races, then yeah, Max is definitely going to be the valid champion there. And to be frank, in my opinion, Lando made a lot of mistakes. I think he showed this was the first time Lando's ever been in a position to battle for the championship. He actually only got his first race win this year. His 6th year racing in Formula One, got his first win because he finally was in a car that could win. And he just showed the pressure. He couldn't really handle the pressure as well because there was quite a few mistakes that he made in racing and qualifying, and yeah, just to put himself on the back foot a bit too often. Next year is going to be very interesting when it comes to those two guys, well, those two teams, Red Bull and McLaren, actually. So there's a lot more to discuss around that potential for next year.
Okay. Reminder for those who do not know Formula One that well, how is a champion crowned? Is it based on points, or is it just based on a winner-take-all final race like there is in the movies?
Oh, no.
Obviously that's how all racing is determined, I guess. But kind of talk a little bit about how you do crown a champion when it comes to Formula One.
Basically, it's whoever has the most points at the end of the year. So each race is worth the exact same amount of points, 25 for the winner, 18 for second, 15 for third, and it goes all the way down to 10th place. So top 10 cars get points during a race. There are, I won't get into the sprint racing at the moment, but there are points awarded for sprint races. They're held 6 times a year, and they are added to the championship value as well. After I just said I'm not going to get into it, I went immediately into it. So, but basically, each race is equal on its value. So, yeah, each from a championship perspective, each race is as valuable as all the others.
Got it.
Yeah, there's no extra points for certain types of races. Yeah.
So the American races don't get extra points, or maybe they should get less points because they were late to the party, and they're trying to impose NASCAR on the rest of.
You could never do that. I mean, they would still race the way they race. They wouldn't try less, but you couldn't do that.
Right.
You couldn't do that.
Yeah. 10 races, second half of the season. Any particular race highlights or any particular race that you enjoyed more than others?
I enjoyed Azerbaijan very much because my local boy Oscar Piastri won that race, but it was also a really intriguing race to watch because Oscar made a killer overtaking move on Charles Leclerc, or Charles Leclerc, as you say in French, and basically Charles was right up his jacksie, like basically within a second for the entire race, maybe 30, 40 laps until the last 5 laps. So it was an incredible defensive drive from Oscar. And it was really, for me being Australian, watching him thinking, please win, please win. It was a very high heart rate race for someone like me, and probably Leclerc fans as well. I mean, I'm a fan of Leclerc, but I didn't want him to win that one. Other races that were great, let me have a look. I'm looking through my spreadsheet to figure out. Like I mentioned before, Brazil was a really good race. The rain tends to mix up the results, and it didn't fail this time. There was a lot going on, a lot to follow. There was a red flag, which means the race stops and restarts, and a lot of drivers received a lot of bad luck, and a lot of drivers received a lot of good luck from that happening because it basically elevates their position. And then, there's a lot more to delve into. I could probably speak for half an hour on why that was the case. To be honest, the Vegas race is always good I think the Vegas race it promotes good racing. The circuit promotes good racing. On paper, that circuit looks like, honestly, it looks like Spider Pig. It looks like an upside down pig. It looks very boring, but it does promote great racing. And when they first announced Vegas, I did get into a bit of a scuffle on a Facebook forum about it. The track looks terrible, it looks crap. And I'm like, I guarantee it's going to make great racing because it looks a lot like the Austrian track. It's a lot of stop-start, slow corners. And Austria always promotes great racing. And I proved to be right. So I was very happy with that. Other races that were great. I mean, I'm just trying to delve into my memory here, mate. It's Italy, Monza. Monza was fantastic. McLaren, that was one where McLaren dropped the ball a little bit. They should have won that race quite easily, but they only came second and third. Charles Leclerc had a great strategy and helped them win that race. Oscar Piastri, another race he should have won. that dude could have won 5 races this year, but was let down either by his team or a bit of bad luck, a bit of strategy. Could have been Oscar fighting for the championship rather than Lando if the cards had to fell the right way for him. But we'll see what 2025 brings.
So when we last talked over the summer, one of the things that was coming up was driver movement, where there's certain drivers, certain prominent drivers were either benched or released in favor of something else, or someone else. So what happened? What happened there the rest of the season?
Yeah, so some decisions were made, and the big talking point we started off with was that Hamilton is moving to Ferrari and he replaced Carlos Sainz, and Sainz hadn't found a seat. He was being courted by a few different teams. So he's ended up at Williams, who actually finished second last in the championship this year, Williams. So they are not a strong team, but he's gone there because he signed a 2-year contract. So he sees the value of their future and better than the other options that he had. So that was a big decision from Carlos, and everyone, well, including myself, obviously, is on the same page that Carlos seems a little hard done by in how he was treated, how he was kind of unceremoniously dumped by Ferrari, because he's a great driver, a great teammate to Charles there. So seeing him in a Williams is kind of a bit heartbreaking because he will be at the back of the grid, but it's going to be also interesting because he has a very strong teammate. So everyone's going to be intrigued to see who wins that battle between himself and Alex Albon, who has a very good reputation as well. So whoever comes out on top of that one is going to only grow their career a bit further as well.
Interesting. Okay. So this season of Formula One, what's going to stand out to you? How are you going to remember this season? Because you mentioned how the sport has exploded in popularity, which I know it has because ESPN, there's a podcast that I listen to. It's called ESPN Daily, and they did a whole thing about Formula One. And they wouldn't do that if it wasn't going to be something that they were popularizing and championing. So you mentioned how last year was a bit of a dud, and this year was quite exciting. So how are you going to remember this Formula One season?
From a sporting perspective, it's the year of McLaren. McLaren came back and they actually won the Constructors' Championship, which was a massive feat, considering at the very start of last year, they were pretty much the worst team on the grid. And so the upgrades, what they brought to that car, absolutely is phenomenal. Because I don't know if it's ever happened really in the history of the sport that a car has come from so far behind to be the championship winning car, like within 18 months, like the quickest car on the grid. From back of the grid to the quickest car on the grid within 18 months it's unheard of. It really is. It's incredibly rare. So I'm going to remember it for that. I'm going to remember it for the fact that we had 7 different race winners, 7 different race winners. 4 different teams won at least 4 races or more. That is also very rare if you go through the history of the sport and see who's won what. Just as an example, in 2022, Verstappen won 15 of the 22 races. The year after that, he won 19 of the 22 races. And so that's why this year lives up a little bit, because we saw different drivers winning. And people often ask me, who's my favorite driver? My favorite drivers, I don't necessarily have a favorite driver. I love the sport for the sport. I like to see different guys win. I champion all of them winning. We just want something close and something exciting to watch for me. Obviously, I have a bias towards the Australian guys, but otherwise, I support the sport, not necessarily even a team or a driver. Yeah.
Was there anything about this season that you weren't a huge fan of? Anything that happened either with the races or any news that has come out? Like, was there any, not controversy, but any news that was like, oh, that's not going to look good for the sport?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things I would say. Firstly, Max Verstappen's driving standards, as great as he is, and he probably is one of the greatest drivers to have ever sat in a car. He's not a very sporting-like driver. He pushes the envelope quite a bit when it comes to fairness. He's within the rules. Sadly, they are changing the rules actually for next year because of the way Max drives. He doesn't. Every other driver, there's an unwritten code of how you drive. There are written codes, obviously, and written standards, but he exploited loopholes very well. So that irked me a little bit from a sporting side. From a political side, the FIA themselves, the guys who oversee and run the sport, well, not run the sport, but they oversee it and police it. A lot of political stuff in the background, especially from their president, who is getting a bit. There's just a lot of corruption. A lot of good people have left the FIA because of the way he runs things. He's very hands-on, which he shouldn't be. He gets involved in stuff that he shouldn't do, and gets himself in a lot of trouble. Says he's gonna stop, and then doesn't stop, basically. So I know Formula One aren't happy with him being there. I mean, considering that the FIA are basically funded because of the money that Formula One pays them every year. The FIA wouldn't exist without Formula One. So it is an election year next year. The president of the FIA is an unpaid position. So you have to be a pretty wealthy man already to even run for it. He is an oil baron, basically, from Saudi Arabia. So he kind of just got into it really for the power, for the prestige more than anything else. So next year being election year will be very interesting to see if he is re-elected as FIA president as well. Decisions being made, what I was unhappy with, we kind of brushed on Sainz being dumped from Ferrari for Hamilton. I mean, Hamilton's one of obviously statistically the greatest driver of all time, but he is going to be hitting over 40 years old when he starts with Ferrari. I mean, he's still very quick, but he's far from his peak now. So that'll be an interesting battle too, actually, between him and Leclerc next year. I wasn't happy with that. Wasn't happy with, I guess, Daniel Ricciardo, another Australian guy. He really just, I don't know, he just seemed to have lost his mojo, and he was once in the top 3 drivers on the grid at some point, and he really just got unceremoniously dumped from the Red Bull Junior team. And yeah, very sad to see Ricciardo go out the way he went out. Other than that, it's mainly only pros from there.
So I'm checking out this article right now that it's one from Business Insider's 7 biggest storylines from the Formula One season and the impact on the sport's future. So
Okay,
talked about Lewis Hamilton. One of the articles, or one of the things that they wrote, was about Red Bull not being as dominant as they were.
Yes, I think we spoke last time about Adrian Newey, who was their chief designer, left the team, and I'm not sure if we got to speak, but he did sign with Aston Martin as predicted. I don't know if we discussed that last in the mid-season wrap. So yeah, they're not as dominant because they did lose. I mean, a lot of their key staff were poached from other teams because that's just what happens in Formula One, that people get headhunted because they're the best at their game. And Red Bull did have the best for a long time. A lot of names who've gone to other teams and have since been dumped. Actually, Aston Martin picked up a key Red Bull guy before they picked up Adrian Newey. What was his name? I'm really hopeless with names lately. Peter someone, I think. Anyway, once Adrian Newey went there, this guy basically left Aston Martin almost straight away. So because his job is now irrelevant, so he'll go somewhere else. I don't know. I don't even know if he's been announced to go anywhere else at the moment. But yeah, sorry. What else is that article saying?
So it's they talked about Lewis Hamilton joins Ferrari. Red Bull no longer is dominant. Number 3, McLaren emerges as a legit contender, which kind
absolutely
of talked a little bit about that.
Yep.
Are there any other car manufacturers or teams that you think is kind of on the rise right now?
Well, Ferrari had a great year. They only just lost the Constructors' Championship to McLaren, so that was a close battle. That went down to the very last race. It was quite tense. Anyone on the rise? I'll tell you what, Haas did a great job this year, especially the second half of the season. An American team, strangely enough, that no one seems to realize is an American team. Yeah, so owned by Gene Haas, and he would know from, I think, IndyCar, NASCAR. He had interest in all American motorsport. They had a great second half of the year. They go in with a completely new driver lineup next year because Hulkenberg has moved over to Sauber, who were turning into Audi, because Audi are coming into Formula One properly from 2026 with the new regulations. So Haas picked up Esteban Ocon from Alpine, the French team, and Oliver Behrman, who is a Ferrari junior driver. So and he had a few races this year and was very impressive. So Haas are one to watch. Aston Martin will also be one to watch, especially with Adrian Newey, but don't look at them until 2026 because next year they're going to be, Adrian Newey doesn't officially start for them until 2020, till March next year. So he won't even look at their current car. He will be looking at the new car, the new regulations. Mercedes also had a pretty good year considering where they were coming from. Other than that, I think it's going to be pretty much a status quo for the rest of the teams. So it'll be interesting to see. It's always interesting to see, actually. I'll probably keep repeating that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So number 4 was Adrian Newey joining Aston Martin. Number 5, the Daniel Ricciardo. But the next one was who replaced Daniel Ricciardo, which
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So a New Zealand fella, Liam Lawson, he filled in for Ricciardo last year when Ricciardo actually broke his wrist in a race. So Lawson came in and was quite impressive. And at the moment, as it stands, Red Bull are still deciding whether or not to keep their Sergio Perez, their second driver, because he had a terrible, terrible year. Like he was, after the first 5 or 6 races, he was just nowhere. And he's the reason that Red Bull lost the Constructors' Championship this year, because he was just pathetic. He was hopeless. I'm probably going to get death threats from that from some of his fans, but Red Bull have, the rumor is he has a contract for next year, but the rumor is that Red Bull are going to have to pay him out of that and get another driver. And for some reason, God only knows, the rumor is that they're going to be picking Liam Lawson. I don't understand why they wouldn't be picking Yuki Tsunoda, who is their other junior driver. Well, not a junior driver anymore, but he's their other driver in their junior team, who's outperformed. He ended Ricciardo's career. He ended Nick de Vries' career. He was a world champion in Formula E, and he's outdone Lawson this year as well. So I don't understand why they'd be choosing Lawson over Tsunoda, but I guess we're waiting for the official word. But the strong rumor is that Lawson will be filling in for Perez and be Verstappen's teammate next year. So I think it's a mistake, but we'll see.
This part of the article also cites that there are a number of younger drivers that are coming into the race. And we'll talk about that a little as we kind of turn the page on the 2024 season and kind of look towards 2025. Because the last part also says that there are more manufacturers joining the fold, because
there are.
They talked about it talked about Audi, and then this article specifically cites Toyota returning to Formula One at some point as well.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Okay, we'll speak about the Toyota. Toyota have come on as a sponsor for Haas, so Toyota Gazoo Racing, which is basically their racing arm. So they're effectively just a sponsor, and they'll be technological partnership. So just to explain a little bit, when Haas entered in 2016, they entered Formula One. I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to look through my spreadsheet. But they entered back in the late teens. And effectively since then, they use Ferrari's wind tunnel. They use basically all the legally allowed parts from Ferrari, like the gearbox, the Ferrari engine, their rear suspension and all that stuff, as their car. So they basically buy parts of Ferrari. They're Ferrari affiliated. The Ferrari junior drivers drive for Haas when they need them to, for Ollie Behrman next year. But with Toyota coming in, Toyota were once in Formula One. We may have discussed this back in the 2000s. They withdrew when the global financial crisis hit. But they have what is known as the best wind tunnel basically on the planet. So McLaren have actually been using their wind tunnel for quite a while, but they have a new wind tunnel they built next to their factory in Woking, England. So basically Haas will be taking that over and using Toyota's wind tunnel instead of Ferrari's. Ferrari's wind tunnel, though, will now be being used for the 11th team to enter the grid in 2026. Was it next year? I don't know. I can't remember that anymore. But Cadillac, GM, have been granted a license to enter Formula One. There's a massive political story around that. That was going to be Andretti's team, but they got denied by Formula One themselves because, again, this all comes down to finances. The teams at the moment, they have a Concord agreement, which is signed until I think they'll have to negotiate a new one. But basically, there's a prize money that goes into Formula One. So they were against another team coming in because they're not going to add value. And effectively, it boils down to them getting a smaller piece of the pie. And that's why they rejected it. The FIA did approve it, but the actual Formula One group were like, no. So now GM have been approved because of all the threats of legal action and blah, blah, blah. Andretti stepped back. There's a sports investment that's come in. But it's also under the proviso that GM will be manufacturing their own Formula One engines from 2028. So it has been announced that they'll be using Ferrari engines for their first 2 years. So it is from 2026, sorry, while they basically develop and build their own engine. Yeah, let's talk about engines a little bit later as well. So yeah, there's a lot behind the scenes there, and they'll basically probably be using Ferrari as well to do a lot of their stuff. They're also using the same guys that Haas used to actually build their chassis, which is Dallara, an Italian company. So these things will be moving on from there. So Toyota might start building Haas stuff. There's other engine manufacturers who have rumored to want to come in, like Hyundai, for example. But we may be talking a while down the track. Yeah.
Trying to think, is there anything else that I wanted to ask you about this season? Anything from like Formula 2 or Formula 3 that kind of stood out to you this year?
Formula 2 was a great championship this year, so we'll touch on that because a guy called Gabriel Bortoleto won that, and he's getting a drive next year for Sauber/Audi. They dumped both of their drivers. Valtteri Bottas was not re-signed. He is a race winner, and he'll go back to Mercedes as a reserve/test driver for them. And then they have a Chinese driver called Guanyu Zhao. He's also not being re-signed. Rumor is he'll be going to Ferrari as a /reserve test driver. So remains to be seen on official announcements for those. But yeah, Gabriel Bortoleto beat a young Red Bull driver called Isaac Hadjar, French guy, who is very impressive. Had a bit of bad luck, I think. Really should have won that championship. So there's also rumors he'll be going to the Red Bull junior team to fill in for Liam Lawson if he goes to replace Verstappen. Replace Perez beside Verstappen. I'm hoping I'm making a lot of sense. I'm hoping I'm making some sense there.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else that you wanted to talk about in terms of 2024 and anything that stood out to you before we start turning the page and we look ahead?
I'll mention one thing about, because we're talking about engines, Alpine, who are a French team and manufacture their own engines because that's Renault. It's effectively Renault. They race under their sports car luxury brand Alpine. They were developing a new engine because 2026, the engine regulations change. They decided to abandon that project and are now going to be racing Mercedes engines because they just didn't have, because their current engine is a bit behind every other engine manufacturer. Okay. Yeah. So they're a bit down on horsepower, basically. So the powers that be decided to go against that. The actual guys who work at the factory had a strike, but they've kind of reassigned them to their other motorsport projects. There was a rumor that GM would be buying their IP to start building their own engines, but apparently that's not happening. So yeah, the fact that Alpine, Renault are now going to be using Mercedes engines will be interesting. So they might be a team on the rise next year, going back to question you asked a while back.
All right. Let's look ahead to 2025. 2025. Now, the season's over. What does a typical off-season look like for Formula One? Because whereas in other sports you have transactions going on where player teams are moving, or you've got the preseason or spring training to worry about, depending on the sport. What does Formula One off-season look like? Because races start back up in, I'm assuming February, March? Okay.
March, yeah. First race next year is in Australia, actually, because of late they've been starting in the Middle East, in Bahrain / Saudi Arabia. They were racing in Jeddah, but they've moved them backwards because of Ramadan. So Australia will start, and I think actually my calendar, Australia, China, Japan, and then Bahrain will go back in April once Ramadan has finished. So how does it look? Basically, it looks exactly the same as during the season, except there's no racing. So they're still working their ass off developing next year's car. They immediately after the last race of the year in Abu Dhabi, they had a post-season testing Pirelli's new tyres for next year, because they do change construction of the tyres to make them stronger, because the cars are quicker, which puts more G-load on the tyres. They've got to make them a bit stronger, but keep them still quick and durable and blah, blah, blah. So they have, I think, a 1 or 2 day test. They test a rookie, and some drivers leaving their current teams were able to test for their new teams. So basically, yeah, it looks the same. For the drivers can do whatever they want, obviously, because they're rich as hell and they don't have any commitment. So they'll probably be on their yachts in the Mediterranean or skiing in the Alps and, doing what rich young guys do in their 20s absolutely should do and would do.
Right.
Yeah.
Must be nice not to have responsibility
Yeah,
out there right now.
absolutely. And not have to worry about the rent, and you can, yeah, and whatever. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm just going to sound like a bitter old man if I get into that conversation. Good on them. They risk their lives a lot. So, yeah, they deserve what they get. Absolutely, they deserve. Probably deserve more, actually, some of them. But for the poor guys at the factory, yeah, they're still working their ass off developing next year's cars. They have to redesign new parts. They're doing a lot of stuff on their computers, wind tunnels, using up the last of their allotted wind tunnel times, and blah blah blah. Then they've got to manufacture parts, and they will do. I think a pre-season test. They have a couple of. I don't even know what they're doing next year for next season's test, but they basically have 3 full days of testing in Bahrain to try out the new cars to see how they are, and then to come to Australia. And that's basically it for a post-season Formula One.
So you mentioned before that 2026, there's going to be new engine regulations. Are there going to
Yes.
be any different car regulations for this coming season?
No, nothing's changing on next year's cars. There's a couple of different like minor changes to do with the DRS, and just some loopholes being closed that teams were exploiting. But other than that, the cars are pretty much unchanged. So that's why any team that was strong this year is more than likely to be strong next year as well, unless they screw the pooch majorly somewhere in their design phase. But there's going to be a lot of carryover parts, and they'll just keep developing. Well, yeah, okay. They may keep developing depending on, because they're going to have to put all their resources then into 2026 when the cars they're shorter, they're going to be narrower, they're going to have all new engines, all new suspension. The whole philosophy of these cars is changing from the aerodynamic philosophy of these cars is being forced to change. There's going to be more moving parts. Front wings will also be opening, right, as well as the rear wing. So engine's going to be using a lot more electronic power, fully biodegradable fuel, so no actual fuel, or completely sustainable fuel sources. And yeah, because they had a target to be carbon neutral by 2030, and they're beating their target, which is impressive. And it makes the cars more road relevant too. And that's what Formula One was always used for back in the day, because it is a prototype sport. It is a prototype racing series. So a lot of stuff that you have in your car today was developed because of Formula One in the 50s and 60s. Honestly, yeah, a lot of that. So they have worked hard over the last decade to bring cars more road relevant, because they were leaning away from that quite a bit. Yeah. Hence the hybrid engines and so forth now.
You mentioned that there's going to be a new crop of drivers that
Yes.
that potentially they love, at least.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
who knows what happens between now and then. However, the
mm,
ones that you do know, the up and
mhm.
coming ones, are you excited about the prospect of the newer drivers out there? Is it a little
Yeah.
bittersweet considering some of the people that they're replacing? What do you think?
Look, it's the circle of life for Formula One. It happens all the time. I am always excited to see new drivers come in. And next year, after we had our pre-season chat where I said this is the first year in history that there's been no new drivers on the grid, no rookie drivers. Next year, I think it's going to be one of the times where there's almost the most. So we've got at least four coming in. There may be five.
Mhm.
Depending, there's only 2 seats not decided for next year, and that is Red Bull and Red Bull Junior Team second seat, and we've discussed that enough. But we'll start at the I'm not going to say the top, but we'll start from Mercedes. So they, with Hamilton leaving to go to Ferrari, they have signed, and I may have mentioned this in the mid-season chat once that was confirmed, that they're signing an Italian driver, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, who's a Formula 2 driver who is very young. He's just turned 18 in September, and is super quick though, has got a great reputation about him. He was not at all impressive in Formula 2, but was impressive in everything else before that. And he's done a lot of testing. He's been very well prepared. He's going to be quick. I'm going up against George Russell. That's going to be a very interesting battle, because Russell really picked up his game this year and basically dominated Hamilton this year, especially in qualifying. In the races, not so much. But so Kimi Antonelli coming in is going to be a big deal.
I cannot imagine being 18 and doing something like this. I think of all the stupid shit that I did when I was 18, and I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life now
Yeah,
that
man.
these 18-year-olds are coming of age and driving in Formula One? And making more money than I could ever imagine.
Well, yeah. Well, okay, they actually just released. I'll go. Do you want to go? We'll go into the money now because they've
Yeah,
actually just
let's do
released.
it. Yeah.
And these figures, I don't know how accurate these figures are. Okay, but they released driver salaries for. I'm going to go into page because I think it was published in there. They published the incomes of the drivers this year.
Do they is that like a standard thing, or is that something that they do every now and again?
It's kind of standard, but it's also a guesstimate. I'm just going to, sorry, because some drivers get a lot of their money from bonuses. And I just want to give you examples of that because someone like Kimi Antonelli, when you mention the money, he's not going to be paid a massive base salary. He will get most of his income from bonuses, for example. So this year, for example, Oscar Piastri raced for McLaren. He's only his second year of Formula One. His base salary is reported to be $5 million, but he also made $17 million just from bonuses because he won 2 races, he finished on the podium 8 times, and he helped the team to a Constructors' Championship. So the rumor is he got $5 million as his regular salary plus 17 on top of that. Someone like Max Verstappen, he was paid a base salary of $55 million, and I think this is in US dollars, by the way. And he would have got bonuses that probably put him up over 90 million because he won 9 races, he won the championship, and stuff like that. So it's definitely not on equal footing. There's no salary cap, there's no drafting, there's nothing like that with their drivers. The drivers' salaries aren't included in the budget cap of the team, and nor are their top 2 highest paid employees, which could be like their chief designer, aerodynamicists, and things like that. So I'm looking for the right article that actually had it in a table format. It was pretty impressive. But yeah, I mean, that just gives you a bit of an indication of the pay structure in Formula One. So Kimi might get a couple of million for the year, only a couple of million, but yeah, and he'll get bonuses per point and stuff, like maybe 100,000.
Couple million.
Yeah.
That's just a couple months for someone like me.
Yeah.
No, I get what you're saying though, because I'm wondering though, for these drivers, is it just kind of negotiated by team? Because I know in other sports there's like unions that collectively bargain stuff
Oh yeah, no,
for
this is all individually negotiated. They have like most drivers have managers. A lot of them are actually ex-Formula One drivers how to deal with the teams. A lot of them are. They're actually professional sports managers. But it is negotiated on an individual basis. And there's a lot of different clauses. They have their get-out clauses if they're not at a certain point. And the drivers also have get-out clauses. If the team's not up to scratch, they can go somewhere else. Or if they get an offer from a better team, they're allowed to go if they're in a lower team. And there's a lot of individual contracts. There's no collective bargaining. They just do all right. I mean,
free for all at that point, and
exactly.
Let the market dictate someone's value based on their performance or their
absolutely
prospective performance. In the case of like a rookie here in the U.S., they just signed. There's a baseball player that just signed for $750,000. Or $1 billion, sorry.
$1 billion, yes. Oh, yeah, I heard about that. That's for a 15 11-year contract? 15 year. That's
15
I actually
years.
did the math on that. So I think it worked out to be 51 million a year, right? So, but that would be on a scale too, wouldn't it? Like be 30 million this year, 35 the next, 37 the next. They'd be on a scale, wouldn't it? I would imagine.
Something like that, yeah.
Terrible money. You'd be paid $1 million a week, basically, for 15 years. Like you could just retire after the first year and be fine. But in saying if Kimi is on 2 million, I'm purely pulling that number out of the air. But if he even gets 2 million, still, I think they're still very underpaid for these guys that have to do 24 races and travel around the world. It's hard work. Like 2 million does not seem like a lot of money, but I would assume the bonuses would be very good. I mean, some drivers have it built in their contract, again, that they don't pay for their accommodation. Some drivers do have to pay for their own flights and accommodation and planes. Like I know a lot of drivers charter planes, or they even have their own private planes, and then they that's their own cost.
Do a lot of these drivers also have things like advertising and brand deals too that they can make additional money on?
Yeah, absolutely. Back in the day, they basically weren't allowed to, but I think there was a bit of a change.
Why? Why though?
I think it was just dictated from the teams, because the teams have their own sponsors, so
Sure,
they
sure.
have to do sponsor. They don't just get in the car and drive. They also have to do a lot of sponsor events, meet and greets throughout the year for their sponsors, like the CEOs of these teams that sponsor. They have to do a lot of shit work and meet people they don't want to have to meet, right? And have their weekends interrupted and blah blah blah. But there was a change. I don't know which driver it was, but I know pretty much most drivers now have their own personal sponsor, or two. And you'll generally see their personal sponsors on, if you ever see a shot of a driver sitting in their car in the pit lane, waiting to get out onto the grid and actually drive, it's normally on the front of their helmet, just where their visor goes down. They normally have their own personal sponsor is situated there, which is a great spot, because when the camera goes on, it's really front and center, prominent signage. So, yeah, I mean, who knows what they get from that? Again, that'll be all individually negotiated what they're getting paid. But yeah, they get their own deals as well. So again, that's just F1 salary. And at the end of the day, people like this don't pay for a lot, right? So they'll go out and they'll get watches given to them just so they wear them. They'll get their clothes given to them, or they don't really have to pay for a meal probably. So, I mean, a lot of the matter they get paid that, they probably don't have to spend a lot of that money either. Yeah, terrible life.
Yeah, just hard, very hard. Well, I shouldn't say that. It is very hard. It is.
That's a tough job.
Yeah, for sure. But the benefits, if you don't get like injured or crashed or start to suck or anything like that, and then you start to lose all your money, definitely become a thing if something like that were to come up. So you mentioned one rookie driver. What about the
Yes,
rest?
I did. The rest. Okay, so the next one on my list here is an Australian driver. Another Australian driver joining the grid next year, Jack Doohan. I'm not sure if Mick Doohan, maybe some listeners have heard of Mick Doohan. He's the son of Mick Doohan, who was a 5-time MotoGP world champion in the 90s. He won 5 championships in a row. Probably should have won 7. So Jack, fun fact is that Mick Doohan had a house literally 10 minutes from where I live, over on the water on the Gold Coast. And in the backyard of that house, where he's got his own go-kart track, built his go-kart track. Jack happened just to grow up with a go-kart track in his backyard. So it's not a surprise that Jack is a very good driver. He chose 4 wheels instead of 2. And yeah, so Jack is now, he's a very hard worker, and he was very impressive in Formula 2. Going to be very interesting to see how he goes next year. I have high hopes, but he also doesn't have as big a reputation as some of the other guys.
Does it kind of, what's the best way to put this? Because so this year in the NBA, LeBron James, who turns 40 or who's about to turn 40, his son got drafted and is in the league now. And
Yes.
I had a bit of a moment where I was like, oh, I feel like I'm getting old because I'm watching a player that I've watched pretty much most of his career, and now I'm watching his son play professional basketball. Is that kind of a similar feeling that you have with this particular driver?
Yes.
And also, does this happen a lot in Formula One, where son of a prominent driver, a la Dale Earnhardt Jr., even though Dale Earnhardt Jr. may be one of the most overrated racers that there is out there, but
oh wow,
for Formula One, does that happen a lot where a son comes in?
It is starting to be honest, some generational stuff. So especially in the lower formula at the moment, like the best of the best generally make Formula One, right? So even the sons of great ex-drivers don't always make it. Michael Schumacher's son Mick was in for Formula One for 2 years. He was not impressive in Formula 2, even though he won a championship. That was kind of almost gifted to him. And he wasn't that impressive in Formula 1 either. And he basically got the arse and hasn't been back since. He has been a reserve driver for Mercedes. I mean, he's a very good driver. I mean, these guys are good, but Formula 1 standard, no. So that's what remains to be seen with Jack. I think his hard work will get him there. But, I mean, back in the 90s, Damon Hill was the son of a 3-time world champion Graham. So Damon was actually the first driver to win the world championship after his dad had won a world championship. That had never happened before. I mean, yeah, it does happen. So in Formula 2 next year, you have a Colombian driver. You would probably have heard of Juan Pablo Montoya. He won IndyCar championship, and he raced for Formula One for Williams in the 2000s when they were good. And his son, Sebastian, has been pretty impressive. So he'll be driving for a big team next year in Formula 2 for Prema. So that'll be interesting to watch. So it does happen. Other drivers have their kids growing up in karting at the moment coming through as well. So I mean, Max Verstappen is the son of an ex-Formula One driver. His dad was a driver in the 90s for Benetton, and not quick on his day, but not a great driver by championship standards. But yeah, so Max is a nepo baby for that as well.
Any other rookies or any other new drivers that you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, well, we spoke about Ollie Behrman, so he'll be driving for Haas next year. He's been very impressive in his first few races that he did race through the year because he filled in for sick drivers. And yeah, he was quite impressive. And the last one is Gabriel Bortoleto, who I did mention. He's a Brazilian driver. So Brazil will have a driver on the grid once again. And he won Formula 2 championship this year in a very exciting finale to that as well. So it's a very promising year next year. It's going to be, as always for different reasons, but a very interesting year from the driver front next year.
Are there going to be any new races, or because you mentioned that there's been an increase in races on a year-to-year basis? Are there going to be any new races or anything different from?
Long story short, no. There'll be some restructuring of the calendar. They'll be in different slots, but no new actual tracks next year. All the same races from this year, just maybe in a slightly different order in some cases. Yeah.
For you, any plans to go to any races or do anything special for any of the races?
Unless I happen to fall into a pile of money that I can keep at some point, maybe, but otherwise, no. I just bought a new car, so I have no savings anymore.
The joys of responsibility and adulthood, right?
Yeah.
So for you as a fan, and since you're a fan of the sport, you're not a fan of a particular team, you're more sport oriented. What do you do during the off season? Are you just clamoring for any piece of news that comes out regarding design, regarding testing? What are you predominantly doing over the off season?
To catch up, yeah. Well, I within a couple of weeks I'll be jonesing for some Formula One action, and I have I'm a physical media collector, so I have pretty much all the season reviews from 2000 onwards. So I might whip in an old season review. I look at the Formula One news every day anyway. It's just one of the first things I do when I wake up is look at Formula One news and just be seeing what's going on. The news is pretty quiet, so the biggest stuff we're waiting for is to see who will actually race for Red Bull next year. So that'll be the next big piece of news we're looking forward to. Other than that, it'll just be seeing what the cars will probably be launched in February, the first 2 weeks of February, third week before they test. So you're interested to see what they all look like. There probably won't be a lot of difference because they normally launch, when they do launch, they launch mule cars. They're not the actual cars they'll even test. They're just basically a livery launch now. They used to be the cars, but used to be big affairs. Now they're just online little events that they do to keep the budget down too, I think. So yeah, I mean, I'll keep my finger in the pie as much as I can. Yeah, there will be withdrawals though.
So when Formula One isn't on, do you have another sport that you watch during this to fill the void, or is it just literally all Formula One?
No other sport anymore. Once upon a time, I would have been watching cricket. Now I'll just be watching movies. I've got a lot of movies to catch up on, as I always ever will until the day I die. So I'll just be watching movies and maybe some TV shows to catch up on as well. But no other sports, honestly.
And nothing wrong with that, to just focus on one particular sport. It's not very often that you find someone that loves sports so much that they keep their own spreadsheet to keep track of everything, which I admire anybody that is willing to do that in order to just preserve the collective history of the season, but also keep track of that as a hobby too.
Yeah, and look, I'm glad I do keep it because I do go back and refer to it quite a bit. Just because some of the stats I keep are quite interesting. I think they are. I mean, I'm not going to bore you or listeners with those, but yeah, it's interests me, and that's the point of it, right? So yeah.
When do you start prepping, or Are you continually updating that spreadsheet throughout the off season,
Yeah.
or is there a particular, well,
Oh, 20,
I guess
2025's are ready to go. I've already
well,
prepared 2025's sheet tab. That's already done.
okay, you mentioned that you weren't going to bore me with it, and I don't find anything boring about spreadsheets because I work in spreadsheets every day. However,
Okay.
I got to know what are some of the things that you're tracking on this? Like I'm sure
Okay.
race time is definitely feels pretty standard, but what else are you tracking?
No, I don't. Well, no, not a race time. So I have, okay, to explain it to people who can't see it. So I have a list of all the teams vertically and all the drivers and their race numbers. Then across the top, I have each race. So within each of those, once a race is finished, I will type in the points that a driver has collected for the race. So if they've won, obviously it's 25. And then if they're outside of that, I'll just be putting 11th. If they finish 11th, 12th, 13th, whatever. So on the right-hand side of that, I have another chart where I track how many times they finished in a position in the race. So that auto fills based on where I've input that data from how many points they've collected in the race. So for example, if they've won the race, I type in 25. This chart will automatically count that as a win. So it's already set up to say, it's a count if formula basically. So if it notices the number 25, it will calculate that as a win. And obviously I have columns to keep tally of their total points. And then I also track the constructors' points by adding together the drivers' points. Within that, I also calibrate how many times they finish in the points, how many times they retire, how many podiums, how many poles, how many fastest laps they've won, and also I track the percentage of time cars have retired across the entire grid, and that was the interesting stat I was telling you about. So, for example, this year there was only 10.63% of retirements, where the year before it was 13, the year before that it was 16%. And this kind of goes down to how the formula, this is the new formula began. So as far as the sporting rules stay the same, or the technical rules stay the same, you'll see the percentage of retirements reduce as they build better cars and more sturdier cars. So underneath that, I also keep the pole times, and I do the fastest lap times and the percentage of the fastest lap compared to the pole lap, and then drivers finished on the podium, who's got the fastest lap, and blah, blah, blah. It's without seeing it, it's hard to explain it. So I also keep a table within this chart of firsts. So drivers or teams have achieved their first milestone of some kind. So a driver who's got their first win, or their first podium, or their first pole position, or their first race will be in that chart. So I can look that up one day and go, oh, when did Jack Doohan have his first race? And I can see it was in Abu Dhabi 2024. So I have things like that as well. And also the sprint race points now, because they have sprint races.
There's something very admirable about the way that you keep track of everything Formula One related, and it helps. Like, it obviously helps you a lot, but even though I don't see it, I could tell just how passionate you are about Formula One. So this has been your third time here. I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate your time, but more importantly, I'm looking forward to the discussion about the 2025 season when it starts back up. So,
Yes.
looking forward to a preseason talk, probably late February, maybe early March, depending on
Mm-hmm.
when is that first race in March in Australia?
It'll be mid-March. I actually just closed my spreadsheet. It'll be mid-March. So I reckon if we do a pre-season before then, we can talk about how testing results went, and then maybe give some predictions and see how spectacularly I fail.
I mean, well, who knows? Maybe you'll be spot on. So we'll have to see. But
Maybe.
Adam, thank you very much for your time as always. Where can the people find you if they want to continue talking about Formula One? And do you have anything that you'd like to plug?
Oh, yeah, of course. If you want to keep talking, well, if you want to follow up and talk Formula One with me, I have an Instagram page with curbside_collections, which is also the name of my podcast, where I talk most things physical. I won't say everything physical media, but most things physical media, where I interview guests about their collections, and also do a monthly chat about what's coming, what's been, what we've me and my buddy Shane, we talk about what we've had arrive, what we've got on order, and also what the labels are releasing for us in the physical media world. And yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, also, look, I do guest as I'll say co-host, but I wouldn't say I'm a co-host, but I'm also on our friend Shane Conto's regular podcast, Cinematic Wasteland, where we delve through the history of cinema.
You are listed as a co-host. You're not listed as a guest. So
Yes, cool.
you're,
Yeah, well, I'm on there every month, so yeah, possibly, yeah.
yeah,
Which is
I had a lengthy conversation with him about that.
okay.
Not that I was trying to convince him to label you all as co-hosts, but
Mm,
we got to, as Shane and I do every now and again, we get into these
hmm.
long talks and just
Yep.
explaining to me a little bit about that particular podcast, how long you three have been doing it together.
Mm.
And eventually I was just like, so he's a co-host. He was like, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well,
So
well, look,
you're all good.
Shane's a good guy, and make no mistake, it is Shane's show. Me and Luke just turn up and discuss the films, and kind of we have a discussion about film history. It's great fun, man. I love doing it. I love stirring them up because I have my little persona on there where I'm the angry guy. Well, not the angry guy, but I just kind of get when we're watching 2 hour silent films, I let them know that I don't appreciate that, but that's all good. It's all in fun.
All good. Well, check out Curbside Collection. Great stuff that Adam is doing with Shane and all of his guests. So greatly appreciate it and greatly appreciate you coming on talking to me about Formula One. I have a feeling that Formula One is just going to continue to grow in
Mhm.
popularity over the next coming years. So looking forward to having you on and continuing that conversation.
Yeah, of course, mate. Anytime. Love being here. Love talking about Formula One. So you've done well at getting me to sharp about it, to be honest. So
Awesome. That's going to do it for this episode of Sportsball. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to anything and everything SPDM Crew wherever you get your podcast. Join us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, X, Threads, YouTube, and Blue Sky at SPDM Crew. Check out our website now out at spdmcrew.com. Shout out to Highflyer Creative Studios for making our awesome logo. Greatly appreciate their support. If you have any marketing, logo, or brand standard needs, contact them at highflyercreative.com. If you've got a podcast idea or you're interested in being part of the SPDM crew as a guest or collaborating, email us at spdmcrew@gmail.com. Until next time, pain heals, chicks dig scars, glory lasts forever.